And then we are back to Steve Darrow for the three-way tie. If I'd known it, if I'd read ahead, I would have just said the three that I said. So anyway, I did agree to do all three with the sixes. So Steve Darrow's back with the third of the three-way tie, and he says, with our newest justice being sworn in recently, please discuss the importance of his originalist philosophy with regard to the Constitution and other laws that have been repeatedly, quote, interpreted, unquote, by the judiciary to mean something that they do not expressly say. Isn't this a blatant violation of the separation of powers? I don't know if it's a blatant separation of the violation of separation of powers. Here's one thing I do know, though, and I've seen this repeatedly, and I think this is one of the most important things I've ever talked about. It's the interpretation of the Constitution that's gotten us into so much trouble. Congress justifies Obamacare by the Commerce Clause. It says the Commerce Clause gives Congress the right to regulate commerce among the people, among the states, rather, and then leaves out the fact that it doesn't say of the people. It allows Congress to regulate commerce between the states, foreign powers, and Indian tribes. And the Constitution repeatedly says there are three entities that we're talking about in this operator's manual. There's the federal government called the United States. There's the states, which are the states, and then there's the people. So if the Commerce Clause were supposed to say what these progressives who use it to justify any government program, if it was going to say what they thought it, or they're selling it as, that it would have said Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the people, but it doesn't say that. So why am I bringing this up? Because the Commerce Clause is so obviously, clearly, absolutely not authorizing the kind of abuse that we see. Nevertheless, constitutional scholars and the Supreme Court and everything will go to precedent. Now, precedent is important in legal systems. I understand that, and the power of precedent is okay. But I had a real breakthrough thought, this is probably 4 or 5 years ago, where the Supreme Court had done a couple of interpretations, and the most famous one, I forget the name of it, I think, but basically the Supreme Court ruled that a guy couldn't feed his own corn to his own animals because it did something to the price of corn or something like that, which was being regulated. So the Supreme Court basically ruled that the federal government had the right to individually regulate the commerce of the people. And the Supreme Court ruled it in the 30s when they did all the other damage during the Progressive era, or maybe a little bit earlier. And so, presumably, we're stuck with it. But here's the breakthrough thought. When I say this is an English sentence, it's written in very understandable English, it's consistent with everything else that's written in the Constitution, there's not a shred of doubt about it. Not a shred of doubt about it. And people say, yeah, well, the Supreme Court ruled this. Then my response is, well, then the Supreme Court is wrong. And it's just wrong. How can you say that? Are you a constitutional scholar? No, that's why I can say it. I can say it because it's an English sentence, and I can read English sentences, and I can understand what they mean. And the power that the Supreme Court has is granted to them by this document. And the document says that Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the states, foreign powers, and the Indian tribes. I am not a state, I'm not a foreign power, and I'm not an Indian tribe. Congress has no power whatsoever over me or my commerce. And as I said earlier, if they'd wanted it to be that way, they would have said Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the people, but it doesn't, so they don't. So when people say, well, the court ruled differently, well, then the court was wrong. The court was wrong. It ruled for a political reason or whatever. This is the point I think really bears mentioning. So many of the things that are up in front of the Supreme Court are just really, shaving a human hair right down the middle, dicing a human hair vertically, 10 different ways in terms of small nuance. And for that, you need great legal minds. And I'm not disparaging that for that application. But when you're dealing with fundamental things like an English sentence that is as clear as day, and by the way, a great deal of effort went into making it as clear as day. Governor Washington and all the, not Washington, Governor Warren? I've forgotten. I'll remember. Morris. He was in charge of the Committee on Style, and basically what was happening is, in one room, all of the constitutional, the framers are deciding, here's what we're going to do. Yes, we all agree on this? This is going to happen in this order? Yes. Okay, here you go, Committee on Style. Take what we've told you about how the government operates and put it in the simplest possible language. And that takes a great deal of skill. Any idiot can make things complex. It takes a genius to make things simple. And Gouverneur Morris was a genius. He wrote "We the People of the United States of America" in order to form a more perfect union. Apparently that came from his pen. So not only is the sentence clear, but a great deal of effort went into making the sentence crystal clear. Same thing with the Second Amendment. This is another one that gets a lot of bandying back and forth, the bit about a militia, being you think I know it by heart by now, but the whole idea that the Second Amendment says that the reason you can have a weapon is for a militia, therefore individual citizens cannot have weapons, is wrong on 2 points. I made a video called Your Second Amendment. On the first point, it says that while a militia is a nice thing for a government to have, and while a militia is a useful thing for people with guns to do, the right of the citizen to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. There's nothing that disqualifies that cause. It's basically like saying the ability to make an announcement about a birthday party being an important part of life in society, my ability to speak freely shall not be infringed. It doesn't mean I only have to talk about birthday parties. It means that this is one of the nice things that can happen if you have freedom of speech, but it doesn't mean you have freedom of speech specifically just to that example. Same with the Second Amendment. It's nice to have a militia, and militias at the time were very important, and that's why the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And again, the founders were absolutely clear. They were not only not idiots, they were geniuses. If they had wanted the country to follow the rules that the progressives claimed that they wanted, then the Second Amendment would have been very simple. It would have said simply the right of a well-trained militia to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and that would have been it. And then you would have had a case, the right of a well-trained militia to keep and bear arms. Okay, so that's clear, but that's not what it says, and there's no question about what it said. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the maintenance of a free state. Yeah. So they put it in there because militias, there was no army at the time. There essentially was no standing army. There's a big deal of argument about whether we should have one or not. And so basically they said, look, we need this. Militias are handy and militias are good for the defense. But the first part is, as Arcturus says, it's a descriptor. It's like I said, it's like, here's something that's nice that comes from the fact that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's as clear as it gets. It's as clear as it can be. And so there you go. It's not up for discussion. And furthermore, this is a much better argument. Somebody came up to me after a speaking event and just said this to me in the space of 6-7 seconds, then just smiled and walked away. And I thought, oh, of course. I mean, my God. What is a militia? A militia is a group of people who have their own weapons. That's the difference between a militia and a standing army, right? A standing army is a group of soldiers who report to the base and they are issued weapons and they are now part of the United States Army. A militia is a group of citizens who come together under some kind of command structure and who bring their own weapons. And that, to me, when I heard that, I thought, of course, of course. Why are we wasting time with the rest of this? That's all you need to know to shoot this stuff down. That's a definition of a militia, you idiots. So, there you go. Some of this stuff's actually very simple. Some of it's not so simple. Great questions, and I'm going to have to really actually end this thing in less than an hour, which is, I think, probably a record for a Stratosphere Lounge show. I don't think we've ever done one less than an hour. But we did 4 questions instead of 3, and I have to apologize for begging off after such a short time, but I am on an awful lot of work to do, and I'm really quite tired, so there you go. Also, I have a family life now, which is pretty nice. Honey, I'm on my way home.